We will talk today about apartheid in South Africa, which is a history of oppression and resistance. Apartheid, a word that means apartness in Afrikaans, was more than just a policy. It was a state-sponsored system of racial segregation that dominated South Africa for nearly 5 decades. It shaped every aspect of life, where people lived, whom they could marry, how they worked, and even whether they could vote. This is the story of apartheid in South Africa. A system of oppression, a long road of resistance, and a nation's struggle to heal. What were the roots of racial segregation? The seeds of apartheid were planted long before 1948. South Africa's colonial history, marked by Dutch colonization in the 1600s and British conquest in the 1800s, set the stage for systemic racial discrimination. After the discovery of gold and diamonds in the 19th century, Black South Africans were used as cheap labor in mines under harsh conditions, while white settlers gained enormous wealth and power. The 1913 Natives Land Act laid the foundation for what would come. Black South Africans, who made up the majority, were confined to just 7% of the land. The rise of apartheid. In 1948, the white supremacist National Party won South Africa's general election and formally introduced apartheid. Under apartheid laws, racial classification became mandatory. Every citizen was labeled white, black, colored, or Indian, each with different rights. Laws like the Population Registration Act, Group Areas Act, and pass laws enforced racial separation. Black South Africans were forcibly removed from cities, sent to so-called underdeveloped homelands, and required to carry passbooks to travel. They were also denied voting rights, quality education, decent health care, and political voice. Resistance and repression. Resistance began long before apartheid and intensified in the decades that followed. The African National Congress, ANC, founded in 1912, became a key player in organizing opposition. In 1952, the Defiance Campaign launched acts of civil disobedience against unjust laws. But peaceful protest was often met with brutal repression. In March 1960, the Sharpeville massacre claimed 69 lives shot in the back by police during a peaceful protest. The ANC was banned. Leaders like Nelson Mandela went underground or into exile. Armed resistance began. Mandela and the global outcry. Nelson Mandela, a leading figure in the ANC, was sentenced to life imprisonment in 1964. He would spend 27 years in prison, becoming the global face of the anti-apartheid struggle. Meanwhile, the world began to take notice. Boycotts, sanctions, and international pressure mounted. Artists refused to perform in South Africa. The United Nations condemned apartheid. Inside the country, protests grew bolder. In June 1976, the Soweto Uprising, led by students opposing Afrikaans, language education, shook the nation. Over 170 were killed. The 1980s brought growing unrest, state violence, and increasing calls for change. The end of apartheid. By the early 1990s, the apartheid regime was under immense pressure, internally and internationally. In 1990, President F.W.W. de Klerk lifted the ban on the ANC and released Nelson Mandela. What followed were years of tense negotiations, marked by outbreaks of violence and political uncertainty. Then, in May 1994, South Africa held its first multiracial democratic election. Nelson Mandela was elected president. So, apartheid, after long decades of brutality, had officially ended. But the wounds remained, and so did the work of building a new nation. What about legacy and reconciliation? Post-apartheid South Africa faced the daunting task of confronting its past. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission, led by Archbishop Desmond Tutu, aimed not to punish, but to expose the truth. Victims shared their pain, perpetrators confessed, and the country listened. Today, South Africa is a democracy, but it still grapples with inequality, racial tension, and economic disparity, much of it rooted in the legacy of apartheid. Remembering apartheid is not about staying in the past. It is about ensuring that history never repeats itself. Apartheid was a dark chapter in human history, though it was not the final one. Through resistance, sacrifice, and courage, millions stood against injustice. Let us honor their memory by standing for justice wherever we are. If you found this story compelling, subscribe for more historical documentaries. Like, share, and comment below. What does justice mean to you today?